Giants, angels, gods, and unimaginable monsters once roamed the world before the gods chose to begin again. Since the flood appears outside the Bible, we'll explore what the world was like before it was submerged in various mythologies. Starting with possibly the first flood story. Sumerian mythology's main source for this story is the epic of Atrahasis. And, just like in the Bible, only one good man was warned about what would happen, which is the fact that the world would be cruelly drowned. This is the one who gives his name to our story, Atrahasis, which translates to something like extremely wise. He was warned by the god, Inki or Enki, depending on your perspective. Atrahasis begins after the world's creation, but before humans are made. I won't discuss Sumerian creation myths here, since I already covered that in a video on the channel. And also because I'm lazy. Yeah, I'm feeling lazy, but it'll be in the card and in the description for you. But let's imagine that somehow you ended up at this moment in the history of Sumerian mythology, which is when Atrahasis begins. Well, first of all, if you're like me and you're feeling lazy, you're going to have serious problems. The story basically starts like this. When the gods, not man, did the work and carried the burdens, it became too much for them. The work was too hard, the problem too great. Well, just like no one in this world, the elder gods didn't like to work very much, and they were also lazy. So they made the younger gods take over the work. These gods, by the way, were called Anunnaki. Well, but the younger gods also got really pissed off and decided to create a new race of beings to work for them. Which race is it? That's right, humans. But before they made proper humans, there were some issues along the way. One goddess combined sweat, blood, intelligence, and clay to create 7 men and 7 women. Well, with that, the gods spent a long time just relaxing, chilling, having a drink, watching Mingo's game. But the human beings worked a lot, so to relax, what did they do? Exactly, they would masturbate and ended up multiplying a lot, and they started making a lot of noise. That began to disturb the gods, especially Enlil, who listened to the noise. And then Enlil decided to cut the humans in half. First, he sent a drought, then a plague, then famine. The humans, unable to endure more suffering, turned to Enki for protection. It works initially, but later, Enlil persuades the other gods that killing the humans is best. They all cause a flood on Earth, but Enki feels sorry for one of his servants. Who is the wise Atrahasis? He goes to him and says that something really bad's going to happen to the Earth, right? Which is basically the cleansing of the human race. Well, then Atrahasis goes and builds an ark, and the flood begins. The flood hit, and people could no longer see or recognize each other in the chaos. The flood roared like a bull, like a wild donkey. The winds howled and screamed. The darkness was total. There was no sun. The goddess Nintuk gave her flesh and blood to create humans. She's also very sad because she saw humans as children. After the waters receded, Enlil and the other gods realized their mistake and became very sad. You know, like when you were a kid and your mom slapped you? She'd say, "Oh, poor thing, I tore his arm off." Kind of like that. Then something really funny happens. After the flood subsides, the Ark of Atrahasis appears, and Enlil sees him emerge. Then everyone learns Enki helped him. Enki must explain himself to the gods, who then come down to eat from Atrahasis' sacrifice. Enki ends up discussing a plan to fix everything. They would create new creatures that weren't as fertile as the first humans. And from now on, there would be women who couldn't have children, and also demons who would kind of take some babies, and women who would have to remain virgins. Atrahasis is taken to paradise to live apart from the new humans. Greek mythology describes several floods. Since I only found reliable sources on the most famous story, Deucalion and Pyrrha, that's the one I'll discuss. According to them, Deucalion and Pyrrha lived during humanity's Bronze Age. Then you ask me, but what is this so-called Bronze Age? It turns out that in Greek mythology, there were several human races, so to speak. In the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and the Bronze Age. There may have been more, but I can't recall. The Golden Age occurred in Kronos' era. These people lived well, without sadness, pain, or hunger, enjoying constant banquets. When the human race died, they became spirits, and the gods then created the Silver Race. They differed from the golden race in both body and spirit. A child lived with his kind mother for 100 years, remaining a simpleton and playing childish games at home. But when they became adults and reached the fullness of their bloom, they lived only a little sadness because of their foolishness. They couldn't avoid sinning or harming each other, nor did they serve the immortals or offer sacrifices at the sacred altars of the blessed, as it is right for men to do wherever they dwell. Zeus, son of Cronos, grew angry and cast them out for refusing to honor the gods of Olympus. Well then, if you were to live before the flood in Greek mythology, depending on the era you landed in, you could live quite well. If it were the Golden Age, but the Silver Age isn't bad either. But in the Bronze Age, things could get a little grim. Because, as they say in the Bronze Age, people loved to wage war, fight, and so on. And it was so much that Zeus himself became very angry. Zeus, the father, made the third generation of mortals, a bronze race born from ash trees. It wasn't like the Silver Age, but it was terrible and powerful. They loved Ares' cruel deeds and acts of violence. They did not eat bread, but they were hard of heart, like unyielding and fearful men. Well, with that then, of course, Zeus decided to start everything over again. Zeus, angered by humanity's impiety, sent a flood to destroy them. Only Deucalion and Pyrrha survived. Warned by Prometheus, they fled to Mount Parnassus in an ark. Other accounts mention survivors on different mountains, such as Dardanus on Mount Ida and Arcus on Mount Selene. After the flood, Zeus made the waters recede, and Poseidon opened the Veil of Tempe to release the waters of Thessaly. Deucalion and Pyrrha asked the Oracle of Delphi how to repopulate the earth. The answer was to throw their mother's bones over their shoulders. They understood this meant men were born from Deucalion stones and women from Pyrrha's, all from Mother Earth. In Celtic mythology, it's hard to describe life before the flood. That's because, in reality, the stories already start by talking about the flood. Interestingly, it's Noah's flood, the biblical flood, but we can still imagine how things might have been. During the 100 invasions, it explains how the Tuatha De Danann, the main Celtic gods, arrived in Ireland. It always talks about how Ireland was invaded by a group of giants who lived at the bottom of the sea. The Fomorians, led by Balor, a cyclops who shot fire or lightning from his eye. Those bastards wiped out everyone in Ireland each time they invaded. And they gave the Tuatha De Danann a lot of trouble in the so-called battles of Moytura. I doubt you would enjoy being in that region before the flood. Anyway, that's when the first invasion happened. It is said that there was a guy named Bith who would be a fourth son of Noah who is never mentioned in the Bible. This guy had a daughter named Sisar, and when Noah was warned that the flood would happen, this woman, together with her father, denied entry to the ark. They desperately searched for refuge. A druid told them about a distant island, Ireland, where they could settle. And when she got there, she went into a cave, stayed inside for a long time, escaped the flood, and even became a goddess. But that's a story for another video. Just like in China, history and mythology end up mixing together. The flood story occurs during Emperor Yao's reign, when a massive flood devastated all of China. And for several generations, the people were forced to take refuge in mountains and trees and to contain those waters. Yao assigned Gan, Yu's father, to build dikes with magical soil called Shiran. But the attempts were a disaster, and Yu ended up being punished. For defying the gods, they were either executed or turned into a mythical creature, depending on the myth. And after Gun's failure, Yu was put in charge of controlling the flood. Unlike his father, he chose a more innovative approach. Instead of building barriers, he dug channels to redirect the waters to the sea. For 13 years, Yu traveled the country, opening passages like Yu's Gate on the Yellow River, letting water flow and irrigate the land. And his dedication was so great that, according to legend, after his marriage, for several years of work, he refused to enter his home. And he would even walk past his wife, saying he couldn't rest while the people suffered from floods. Going back to the mythological part of things, here we have the Incas, and the Incas have several versions of the flood. In the first one, it's a version very similar to the others we've already talked about here. Men lived well on earth. No hunger, no war, nothing else. But they forgot the supreme God. Viracocha. He got angry and decided to send a violent flood to cleanse humanity. But the local shepherd noticed the signs and climbed the mountains with his family. And through him, humanity came to rule the earth again. There's a more interesting version. In Earth's early days, when light was scarce, some living beings already walked the planet. There was also an evil spirit named Auka. With nothing to do, he decided to bother humans and spoke to them. Atop the mountains with the Apus, mountain spirits, there was a fire flower that could grant them the wisdom of the spirits. The men who were dying of cold started to climb the mountains, but the Apus didn't like what they saw and sent jaguars, who came down tearing those men apart. Besides that, they came down to earth and also started killing the other humans. And then the sky began to cry for what it saw, flooding the earth. When it comes to the Bible, I think most people have an idea of the world before the flood, like the Garden of Eden. I know you might be thinking about going back to that time or being there. You would see many good things there in the Garden of Eden. However, you have to remember that you might end up getting scared by some things you would see there. For example, all the animals were there in the Garden of Eden. So you might walk around and encounter a grizzly bear that wouldn't attack you at that moment. It's still scary having that animal in your face. And there were also other very strange creatures, like snakes with legs or wings. And there were also the angels. And you could just be there, walking around the nice and cheerful garden, and then see that right in front of you. Which is a throne and which is a cherub, sir, with multiple animal and human heads together. It would be a bit scary, right? Especially after Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden. If you ended up there, you would have a lot of problems, especially with food, because hunting, planting, that kind of thing would be very complicated. Because Adam ate the fruit, he was cursed to always live off the land and face many problems. And, according to the book of Enoch, later on, we would have the coming of the Watchers, who were angels that fell in love with human women and came down here to have sex with them. And because of them, the giants were monstrous, devoured everything, attacked humanity, and even fought among themselves because of it. That the flood would have come, but luckily Noah ended up being warned, and he built the ark. In Norse mythology, being born before the flood would be boring since you'd be in Ginnunga Gap at the world's beginning, where the ice from Niflheim and fire from Muspelheim met, and where Ymir and Audumla were born. You'd also meet Odin's grandfather Buri, his father Bor, Odin, and his brothers Vili and Ve. So, what then? You would probably also have to help them kill Ymir so they could create the world. And you would also have to be careful, because from the moment Ymir died, his blood would cause a flood there, a flood that killed many giants, leaving only one couple alive, who are the parents of the Jotuns in the mythology. In Mayan mythology, which, by the way, I have a video here on the channel telling its whole story, you'd have to hope to be born in the right generation. Because if you were born in the wrong one, you could end up being a pile of clay and die right after being born, or a pile of dust. Which human generation did the gods mess up making? And if you were born in the right one, you would be a wooden human and you would be hated by everyone there, by all the animals, and even by the gods. Because these wooden humans made a lot of noise, because of the joints they moved, and also because they never stopped talking at any moment. Additionally, this generation forgot the gods, leading Huracan to send a flood to earth. And it's not a flood of water, it's not a flood of fire. And so humanity was made again, but this time through corn. In Hindu mythology, the world before the flood seemed much like it is today. In Hindu mythology, the universe is cyclical, repeatedly beginning and ending. They say that during the flood, a Vishnu avatar was sent to earth. The first one actually was a fish, and this fish ended up being cared for by a monk. And then, as a thank you for what the monk had done, the avatar decided to warn him that a flood would happen on earth and told him to build a boat, an ark, something like that. Besides warning him, Vishnu also guided the vessel through the entire flood. Well, now I'm going to tell you about the Brazilian Indigenous flood, okay? And since I don't know exactly how to pronounce certain names, I'm already apologizing. To start with, well, this flood is from Zerawaiti, and I want to thank the person who showed me this flood story here, which was Ozaus, who is a subscriber of the channel. I'll leave his Instagram in the description for you to follow because he makes really good art. Also, in primordial times, before the pain of work and hunger, humans and gods shared the same ground. The earth was not yet isolated, it was one. Among the many planes of the Zerawite cosmos, a layer in the great body of the universe, suspended between the underworld and the high stone heavens. At that time, there was no planting, no harvest, no fire, but there was also no death. It was a full existence, simple and without suffering. But this harmony ended due to a mysterious gesture. She did it, though still a mystery. It said she erased her footprints from the stones, a symbolic gesture of denial, perhaps a break from memory, from the sacred mark of the God of the world. If she had betrayed herself, Aranheim stayed silent. She grabbed her shamanic rattle, lit her pipe, and started singing. As she chanted her ritual song, the stone beneath her feet and beneath the feet of many other beings began to rise up to the solid. Nephew, Riridia, Odosmade, future gods, and diverse divine entities. That's why they created the celestial tiers. First, the closest sky, where the gods live in stone houses with stone utensils as malleable as clay. Then, the red sky, where the Awapidapa dwell, the highest among the gods. But what was elevation for the gods was ruin for men. With the removal of the petro support, which held up the earth, it collapsed. The earth gave way under the waters, and the flood came. Some say that a river overflowed, others that the rain never stopped. Either way, the water covered everything, and with it came the sacred predators Yori, the god alligator, and Pacuaco, the god fish, piranha, who emerged from the murky waters and began to devour the humans. In the end, it seems certain, but 3 survived, 2 men and 1 woman. They climbed to the top of the Bacaba palm tree and stayed there while the world around them sank. Their names were forgotten. Among the Arawete, they are remembered as Tima Ipe, the first ancestors of new humanity, the only survivors after the world's collapse. Thus, the gods left and the humans remained, and that's why the Arawete say that we are the abandoned ones. Let me know in the comments which of these worlds before the flood you would choose to stay in. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share the video, and leave a like as well, okay? Thanks, see you, bye.